apasionado por ayudar a los seres humanos a alcanzar y experimentar una salud excepcional. Llegó a vivir con los bosquimanos en África, estudiando sus patrones alimentarios. Toda esa investigación culminó en uno de los programas más exitosos para transformar nuestra relación con la comida, llamado WildFit. Demos la bienvenida a Edmeades.
Wow, that's a great backstage entrance. This is amazing. I've been having this feeling, I don't know if you've ever had this, where you're sitting having dinner with your family and there's so much interesting stuff going on that you keep wanting to add something, but you don't know if you have enough to add. And I felt like that for 2.5 days. So here I am, it's my turn to add something, and I'm very happy about that. So I have an observation that a lot of what we've been talking about over the last couple of days has had to do with innovation. So I have a question for you. Is innovation good or bad? I'd say yes. I'd say innovation is good or bad. You know, I went out for a run the other day, out past the hotel, and you go up over the overpass, and I'm out for a run. And as I'm coming along, I see this little dog coming. This little dog is coming along, and he's barking at me, you know, but he can't seem to bark. You know, there's something not right. And he can't, it's not, and I've never heard of dog laryngitis. Have you seen, I've never seen that. So I'm kind of, and then this couple is coming along, older couple, and it looks like the dog probably belongs to them from the dog's behavior. And so I asked them out of concern, like, is the dog okay? You know, is he all right? And the woman, she gets a little bit, she's like, he's just fine. And I'm like, okay, I just hear the barking. And she goes, he was barking all the time, so we had him debarked. They removed his bark box. And I'm thinking, I'm not very happy about that. But I look, it's their dog. I'm not here to interfere. But I did think maybe I could stir some trouble. So I turned to the husband and I go, how did you feel about this? And he said, I didn't have an opinion. Now, the point of this story is that not all innovation is good. You do not need to remove your dog's bark box. They can be trained not to bark. And there's a lot of innovation around us that is, let's say, questionable. And so what I want to put out to you is that we are living right now in the safest, best, easiest times in the history of human existence. We have more certainty about our lives today than we've ever had. You know, for example, that you're going to eat today and tomorrow and the next day. You know you're going to sleep in a safe house. You know that it's very unlikely that somebody's going to attack you and hurt you or harm you or try to take your things from you. You live with a tremendous amount of safety that none of our ancestors ever lived with. Meanwhile, we have more addiction, more depression, more suicide than ever before. This doesn't make sense. If aliens came to Earth and they looked at what was going on, they would have to figure this out. Humans don't like it to be easier. We obviously don't like it. The easier life gets, the harder we find it to live. The easier life is, the more drugs we need. The easier life is, the more Netflix we need. The easier it is, the more junk food we need. The more alcohol we need. The more therapy we need. The more prescription medication we need. Why is that? And maybe that is that the easier life is, the harder it gets to live. And maybe what that means is that sometimes, just sometimes, what we should be doing is making the tougher decisions, that we should be pushing ourselves. And I think a lot about that. Over the last 15 years, I've been visiting the Hadza people of East Africa, and they are one of the last hunter-gatherer tribes on earth. They're proper hunter-gatherers. They have no money, they have no agriculture, they move with the water and they move with the game, and they live a life that I don't think we can romanticize as being the life of our ancestors, but I do believe we can say that their life is closer to the life of our ancestors than anything we know today. And in observing them, I saw something really fascinating one day. I was on a very long hunt. and I got separated from the main group. And I'm just out running, and I'd already done about 15, 16 miles that day. And it's hard miles. It's hard, it's Africa hot, and there's no meeting place to find my friends. And I have an out-of-body experience. I leave my body and I look down on myself and I see something clearly for the first time. And that is that those people get dopamine for doing things that are good for them. Every single thing that rewards them is good for them. When they go to hunt, it's good for them. When they gather, it's good for them. Everything they do that gives them reward chemicals is good for them. And we have the same chemicals that they have. We have the same neurotransmitters. We have the same emotional responses. But the difference is that we have a variety of different influences. Like, for example, many of us can do things that make us feel good that are bad for us. Is it true? Is it true that we eat food that we know is not ideal? We eat it because it makes us feel better. Is it true? So I spotted something that I call the evolution gap. And that is a gap between our very slow pace of genetic evolution and the incredibly fast pace of innovation that's happening around us. And it's having all kinds of effects. So obviously in my company, WildFit, we talk a lot about food. We help people change their relationships with food. Here's an example of the evolution gap. Sugar tastes good, yes? It does. Why? Why does it taste good? That's clearly a bad idea. Like, it's clear if it's bad for us, but it tastes good because there was once a very good evolutionary reason for it to taste good. A tree wanted its seeds to move from here to over there. And so it made bright-colored fruit that tasted very nice, and it paid you to move it. It paid you to do that. And that's evolution. We got great vitamins from it. We got energy from it. It was a good deal. But remember, how long was the fruit available for? A few days? A few weeks? Now how long is it available for? Every single day, in every single shop. And now we have simulated fruit. Candy, sugar, sweeteners, and we put it in everything. So the evolution is we have a craving for sugar. When we eat a little bit of sugar, we crave a little bit more. This used to save our lives. It prepared us for winter. It was important. Now, food manufacturers put sugar in our food to make us hungry. It's a problem. Here's another example. Skin color. Why do we have all these different ranges of skin color? Well, because depending on where your ancestors evolved, you needed a different tone of skin to either protect you or allow the right amount of sunlight in. Very simple. If you grew up in, if your evolution, if your ancestral history took place in, say, Central Africa, then you have very dark skin because there was a huge amount of sun. And so you evolved the ability to have more melanin and you have darker skin. Then, as the Earth's population expanded out of Africa and moved south, skin got lighter and lighter. And then as they moved north, skin got lighter and lighter. Matter of fact, if you see my girlfriend walking along, it's sometimes hard to see her because she's like see-through. You can see, I'm kidding, but she's from Estonia, so guess what? Super light skin, blue eyes, blonde hair to let the sun in. That's evolution. It's gorgeous. The gap is when we move a distance that used to take generations. It used to take generations to move 1,000 miles. And now you can do it in a car in a few hours or get on a plane and fly to a completely different. So what happens if my blonde-haired, blue-eyed girlfriend goes to Nigeria and lets herself be in the sun without protection? What happens? Burning, pain, suffering, disease, immune system suppression. It's bad for her. Equally, though, if we take somebody from Nigeria and we move them to Estonia, what happens to them? Depression, vitamin D deficiency, the development of rickets. This is the gap. And what I want to suggest is that almost all of the problems that we suffer with in the world today, almost all of the challenges that we face in the world today come from this gap. We are suffering with, here's an example. In 1800, the average American ate about 4 pounds of sugar a year. Seems like a lot, really, 4 pounds of sugar. By 1900, the average American was eating 40 pounds of sugar. 40 pounds of sugar. Anybody know how much they eat now? 150 pounds. 150 pounds. And they don't even know they're eating it. Because if you look at the ingredients, you know the ingredients have to be listed in order, right? The higher up the list, the more there is. Now, they've renamed sugar. There's over 100 names of sugar. So now you'll see sugar all over the list so they can push it down the list. It's everywhere. And it's a problem. If we take a look at the 1970s, diabetes. You had to be over 40 years old to get diabetes in 1970. It was called adult onset. It wasn't an available condition if you were under 40 years old. It just didn't happen. Now, we're talking about 1/3 of Americans. And by the way, we can get all arrogant about those silly Americans with their health problems. Let's not pretend that we don't have the same health problems all over the world. They just get there first. You know, it's happening everywhere. And so now what we've got is 1/3 of Americans are dealing with prediabetes or diabetes. 1/3. That's costing the American government over 300. Well, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. How much is it costing? Obamacare apparently saves the American government about $10 billion a year. Seems like a lot of money, $10 billion. But some of you might have this feeling that $1 million and $1 billion are kind of close to each other. You know, millionaires and billionaires. Let me explain the difference to you between millionaires and billionaires. If you have $1 million, you can spend it in 1 year by spending $83,333.33 every month. You'll be gone with $1 million in a year. If you're a billionaire, you have to spend like that for 1,000 years. It's a very different thing. And so when Obamacare saves $10 billion, that seems like a big number, don't you think? Only diabetes is costing the American government over $300 billion every single year. It is a health crisis beyond any measure. And what's going on is that we have these evolved bodies that evolved to live in nature, and we've developed innovations that have separated us from our history. So our cravings don't work anymore. We crave things that are bad for us. We distract ourselves with things that are bad for us. So I want to talk a little bit about psychology, because this is the biggest thing of all. If we really live in the safest, best times in the history of ever, which we do, less people are in poverty today than ever. The conditions on earth are better than they've ever been from a personal security people for the vast majority of earth. We truly live in the best times ever. Why so much depression? Why so many anti-anxiety meds? Why so much prescription? What's going on? You know, I sat with the chief of the Hadza family that I was visiting with. His name is Ngonga. I can't quite do it, but that's as close as I'm going to get. And I asked him one day, I said, do you guys have like long-term sadness? Do you have depression? And they didn't have a word for depression. So I had to explain, like somebody's sad for many days in a row, you know, lots of sadness. And he goes, no, you can be sad for a day or two, maybe 3, but then you have to be done with it. And I go, what do you mean you have to be done with it? And he goes, well, you'd get hungry. You know, it's just not sensible to be sad for so long. It was just so matter of fact the way he said it. It was just so straightforward. And so then I said, well, I'm curious, do you guys have suicide? Do you have that? Do you guys know that the top 10 causes of death in America account for 80% of all mortality? And 100 years ago, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer and suicide were not in the top 10. They weren't in the top 10 at all. Now, heart disease is number 1, cancer is number 2, diabetes is at number 3. By the way, number 4. Number 3 is medical error. So you have to be like sick to be there. And by the way, what just debuted on the charts? Just debuted on the charts at number 10 on the charts. What just got there? Suicide. We live in the safest times in the history of Earth, and suicide just made it into the top 10. So I asked Nona, I go, like, do you guys have suicide? There's no word for that. There's no word for suicide. So they have to explain it to him. They go, well, in our culture, sometimes people choose to end their own lives. He looks at me like I have just said something so insane. He can't believe what I've just said. And there's a guy in the cave behind us. He's sleeping on a skin. And we have this all on camera, and he's sleeping on the skin. And the guy, he apparently wasn't sleeping, because when he heard me describe suicide, he started laughing. No, you're kidding, right? They don't, like, they end their, no. It was an alien idea. They had never even occurred to them before. And so then, think about it. If you didn't know about suicide and somebody then told you that such a thing existed, what would your next question be? It'd have to be how. Why might be good, but I'd be really curious about how, right? So he says, well, how do they do it? And funny thing is, we'd spent that whole day, he taught us how to make poison for hunting. So we'd spent the whole day mashing this stuff and cooking it over the fire and showing us how it's all done. It was really fascinating. So then he goes, well, how do people do it? And I said, well, some people use guns. And they don't have guns, but they know what they are. And so he's like, oh. And I go, well, and some people they jump off stuff. They jump off. And he's like, oh, and by the way, that's one of their top 10 causes of death, is falling off high places. So he didn't like that idea at all. And I said, well, and some people poison themselves. And he goes, if you got to do it, that's the way. But the real message here is that we really are living in the safest, best times ever, and yet we have more sadness and depression and anxiety. And what I want to suggest to you is that we can stop that. And there's a few things that we can do to stop that. The one is that we can bring consciousness to the conversation. Like, here's an example. Okay, we talked about skin color. If we're going to talk about skin color, let's talk about how we feel about skin color. Racism. Where does that come from? In our world today, if you have a bit of a racist thought about something, you're evil. You're a bad human being. That's not a place of healing. That's not a place of understanding. So what if we back up? What if we back up and say, where does that feeling come from? Well, for the vast majority of human history, the safest people around you were the people who lived in your village. And guess what? They looked, sounded, and smelled a lot like you. And the village next door, they were medium safe, medium safe. And they looked a bit like you too, because there was some DNA swapping going on between the villages. But each village you move away, the people become increasingly dangerous to you. And they look, smell, and sound increasingly different from you. The idea of being afraid of somebody because they're a little bit different than you is an evolved response. It's not something to feel guilty about, but it is something to become conscious of. What's wrong is acting upon it. What's wrong is victimizing somebody. But understanding the feeling in your heart doesn't make you a bad person. It says, I can bring consciousness to this. Does this make sense? And so in each step, that's what we want to do. Right now, here's what's going on. You have emotions, chemicals, they're chemicals, and they're designed to help you speed up your decisions and help you to survive. This has truly happened to me. I'm walking down a trail into a river in Africa, a dry riverbed, and there are 14 lions sitting here. What happens to me now? What do you think happens to my body? Like serious, pump, pump, pump. It's terrifying, it's afraid. I'm producing adrenaline and cortisol. Why? You'd be amazed. Of course, speed and strength, of course, but also blood coagulants. I'm actually thickening up my blood to stop me from bleeding in case I get an injury. That's how amazing your immune system is. Very valuable if the lion is there or if somebody's attacking you. Now, fast forward to today, you're driving your car and red and blue lights are behind you. You produce the same chemicals. Fear, speed, strength. But wait a minute, what also happens when the lions are there? You lose some of your intelligence and some of your logic. You don't need that. You don't need to look over at the lions and go, oh, the largest predatory cat in Africa typically lives in prides. You need to know how big, how close, how far, super basic logic. So the more fearful you are, the less intelligent you are. Now, the police pull you over, you become less intelligent, you become more aggressive. Does this help? How about this? Who of you have ever received a bill, a legal document, or something like that and felt adrenaline? What were you afraid of? Were you afraid of getting a bad paper cut from the envelope? Because it's not doing anything to you. And then the worst thing we do is we got the legal summons, bump, 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 kill, fight, defend, and then you reply. Who here has ever replied to a message that they should have waited to reply to, right? What we want to do is understand that we have this Paleolithic frame in a modern world, that the innovations around us that are making life easier and easier are a trap. Use the stairs, not the escalator. Don't use the walking sidewalk in the airport. Don't eat this processed garbage food. And don't allow your consciousness to get hijacked by the events around you. And so I'm going to give you a little prescription, and it's this simple. Rewild your life. both literally in that you spend more time in nature. You know what's crazy? When you're in nature and you hear birds, your blood pressure goes down. Do you know why? Because in nature, the birds are only making those noises when the environment is safe. Spend time in nature and spend time trying to rewild your life. Look for ways to move your body more, to avoid the industrialization of food. And this is a big one. When difficult things come to you, realize that you've got a prehistoric brain that's trying to solve the problem for you. And sometimes what you need to do is slow down, take some deep breaths, and bring your consciousness to the table. If you rewild your life, you will find yourself feeling significantly more free. You will have personal liberty and personal freedom because you'll be able to choose your response to your life. It's everything. Thank you very much. Thank you.